Every day, a steady stream of tourists gathers around Buckingham Palace, the iconic symbol of British royalty. The grandeur of the palace, with its beautiful architecture and historical significance, never fails to attract attention. But there's another feature of the palace that draws crowds of people from all over the world: the royal guards. These guards, dressed in their bright red uniforms and towering bearskin hats, are a sight to behold. They stand completely still like statues stationed at their posts at Buckingham Palace, watching over the royal residence. The guards are known for their disciplined, no-nonsense behavior. Day after day, they stand at attention, rarely blinking or shifting their gaze. The air around them seems almost sacred. They are part of a long-standing tradition, a living symbol of the monarchy's strength and endurance. For the tourists, the royal guards are a source of both admiration and fascination. People from different countries come to see them, many hoping to capture the perfect photograph of these remarkable figures. To the casual observer, it might seem as though nothing can break the composure of a royal guard. They are like statues, standing firm and unwavering in the face of crowds shouting, children, or even loud tourists trying to get a reaction. The guards are known for their ability to remain stoic in almost any situation. The truth is, the guards are highly trained soldiers who have served in the British Army. Their discipline is not just for show, it's part of their job. They're responsible for protecting the royal family and the palace itself, a task that requires utmost focus and dedication. This unyielding composure is something that tourists have come to expect, and many make jokes about trying to get a guard to laugh or smile. Some tourists even try to provoke the guards to see if they can break their character. There are countless stories of people standing in front of them, making funny faces or acting like they are going to perform a ridiculous dance. But the guards, without fail, stand unmoved. No matter how hard people try to get a reaction, the guards stay stoic, their faces unreadable. In many ways, the guards have become a kind of living challenge. Tourists wonder, can I make them laugh? Can I get them to react? It's as if they are testing the limits of their control, hoping to break them. It's all in good fun, of course, but it's also a reminder of just how serious and professional these soldiers are. But what most people don't realize is that, despite their seemingly cold and indifferent exterior, there are moments when even the most disciplined guards can be caught off guard. There's a saying among the people who work at the palace that even the strongest of wills can waver. While the guards may seem unshakable, every so often they have to deal with something that challenges their sense of control. But these moments are rare. The general public never sees them. After all, the guards are professionals and they take their role very seriously. They know that even a small moment of weakness can break the magic of their silent presence. However, on this particular day, things would be different. A change in the air seemed to be approaching. As the sun shone brightly over Buckingham Palace, a large group of tourists gathered outside the gates, their cameras in hand, their excitement palpable. It was a perfect day for sightseeing in London, and the royal guard stood as they always did, their eyes fixed ahead. For the tourists, this was just another ordinary day of observation. But for one guard, it was about to become anything but ordinary. The crowd around the palace was unusually lively that day. Families, couples, and groups of friends walked by, stopping to snap photos of the beautiful building. Among them was a group of young tourists, a pair of friends who had come all the way from the United States. They were in London for the first time, and they were eager to see the sights and experience the city. They had heard all about the famous royal guards, and they were determined to get the perfect picture. One of the friends, a young man named Jack, had heard all the stories of people trying to make the guards laugh. He thought it would be funny to try and get a reaction out of one of them. Jack was a bit of a prankster, always trying to make people laugh and testing boundaries. He turned to his friend Sarah and grinned. "Let's see if we can make one of them crack," Jack whispered, already stepping closer to one of the guards. Sarah hesitated for a moment. "Are you sure? I mean, they don't really seem like they want to joke around." Jack, however, was already committed. He had a mischievous look in his eyes and he wasn't about to back down. Sarah reluctantly followed him, both of them inching closer to the guard on duty. They were careful not to get too close, but Jack had a plan. He was going to stand right in front of the guard and start mimicking his stance. Jack stood tall, puffed out his chest and raised his arms straight down by his sides, trying his best to copy the guard's rigid posture. His face became stern, his expression exaggeratedly serious. Sarah, watching nervously, took out her camera and started snapping pictures. Jack, determined to get a reaction, began to make tiny, exaggerated movements, lifting his leg as though he was about to march, then snapping his fingers, trying to get the guard's attention. He was acting like a clown, moving in ridiculous ways, and yet the guard remained perfectly still, his face unreadable. The crowd gathered around laughing, some of them whispering, others recording the scene on their phones. The guard, who had been standing at attention, did not acknowledge Jack's antics. His eyes never moved. He didn't blink. His body remained in perfect alignment with his post. It was as if Jack didn't exist. But then something unexpected happened. For the briefest of moments, just a flicker, the guard's lips twitched. It was so subtle that no one but Jack and Sarah noticed. There was a tiny smile barely visible before the guard returned to his unyielding state. Sarah gasped quietly, unsure if she had really seen it. Jack, too, looked around to see if anyone else had caught that brief, silent moment of humanity. The crowd, who had been laughing and enjoying Jack's performance, noticed the change too. It was as if they had all witnessed a miracle. The guard, who had seemed impervious to anything around him, had shown the smallest hint of a smile. But just as quickly as the smile appeared, it was gone. The guard was back to his stoic self, his face a mask of professionalism once more. The tourists around them whispered and pointed, not knowing how to react. Jack, feeling victorious, turned to Sarah and whispered, "I did it." I made him smile. But of course the victory was fleeting. The guard's expression returned to its impassive state, and life at Buckingham Palace continued, seemingly unaffected. However, Jack had unknowingly opened the door to something far more interesting than simply breaking the guard's stoic composure. What Jack didn't realize was that sometimes, even in the most disciplined moments, the universe has a way of delivering justice, and karma works in mysterious ways. What he had just triggered would have a ripple effect that none of them could foresee. As the tourists continued to crowd around Buckingham Palace, Jack felt a surge of triumph. He had succeeded in getting the royal guard to smile, even if just for a fleeting second. The realization that he had pulled off something many others had failed at made him feel as though he had won some sort of challenge. The crowd around them applauded his antics, many even congratulating him for the accomplishment. Jack basked in his little moment of fame, smiling proudly. Sarah, still holding her camera, snapped a few more photos, capturing the memory. "I can't believe you actually got him to crack," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. She was still amazed that Jack had managed to get a reaction from the usually unflappable guard. They had both heard the stories about the royal guard's legendary composure, so to witness the brief smile was nothing short of a small victory. "Yeah, I guess I've got that effect on people," Jack said with a chuckle, shrugging as he continued to look around at the excited crowd. People were still whispering about what had just happened, and he could feel a sense of pride building inside him. As they stood there, Jack noticed another group of tourists nearby, all eagerly watching the guards. They seemed curious, as if wondering whether they too could get a royal guard to break character. Jack could tell they were sizing up the situation, probably thinking the same thing he had earlier. Maybe I could do that too. Feeling a little mischievous, Jack decided to give it another shot. He turned to Sarah with a grin. "Let's see if I can do it again. Maybe I can make this guard laugh too." Sarah looked at him with a nervous expression. "Jack, maybe we should leave him alone now." "It's kind of rude to keep trying to mess with them. I mean, they're doing their job. It's not like we're supposed to be here to entertain ourselves at their expense." Jack dismissed her concerns with a wave of his hand. "Come on, it's just a little fun. I'm not hurting anyone. Besides, I'm sure they're used to it." So, without another thought, Jack sauntered up to another royal guard. This one was stationed at a different post, standing as perfectly still as the first. The guard's uniform gleamed under the sun, and his posture was as rigid as ever. Jack paused for a moment, eyeing the guard up and down before he stepped in front of him. With a smirk, Jack began to repeat the same silly dance moves he had performed earlier. He exaggerated each movement, jerking his arms up and down, stomping his feet, and even trying to balance on one leg, all in a deliberately over-the-top manner. He was determined to get the guard's attention, and he couldn't help but feel confident that it would work again. This time, Sarah was even more hesitant. She could see the seriousness in the guard's eyes as he stood unflinching in his post. "Jack, stop it. I'm not sure if this is a good idea anymore," she said, her voice filled with worry. But Jack, as always, was undeterred. He simply kept going, moving around the guard and trying his best to get him to react. At first, there was nothing. The guard didn't flinch, didn't move an inch. It was as if Jack wasn't even there. A few other tourists, seeing Jack's antics, started to laugh and record the scene on their phones. But despite the laughter, the guard stayed focused, his eyes locked on some distant point. It was almost as if he had shut the world out entirely. Jack, feeling more determined than ever, took his antics up a notch. He started to mimic the guard's exact movements. When the guard took a step forward, Jack stepped forward. When the guard raised his arm, Jack raised his arm. He even began to do a slow, exaggerated march, following the guard's every move. It was a ridiculous scene, one that made the crowd laugh even harder. But still, the guard didn't react. His face remained impassive, his eyes unblinking. Jack was starting to feel a little silly. He had tried everything, but the guard was holding strong, his resolve seemingly unbreakable. As Jack's attempts grew more desperate, he didn't notice the change happening just behind him. A figure had stepped out of the crowd, a London police officer who was patrolling the area. The officer had been quietly observing the scene, his eyes scanning the tourists and ensuring everything was running smoothly. But when he saw Jack continuing to mock the guard, he decided it was time to step in. The officer approached Jack and tapped him on the shoulder. "Excuse me, sir," the officer said in a firm yet polite tone. "I think it's best that you stop what you're doing. These guards are here for official duties, and it's disrespectful to mock them." Jack was caught off guard, the officer's words cutting through his sense of triumph like a cold breeze. He turned around, startled by the officer's sudden appearance. "Oh, come on," Jack replied, rolling his eyes. "It's just for fun. I didn't mean any harm." The officer raised an eyebrow. "That may be, but they're doing their job, and you're making a spectacle out of it. We don't tolerate that kind of behavior here." Jack felt a rush of embarrassment wash over him. The officer's serious tone was a sharp contrast to the playful energy that had fueled his actions just moments before. He hadn't expected this kind of response. Most tourists, after all, only ever got a warning if they were caught doing something silly. But no one had ever told him to stop directly. "Sorry," Jack mumbled, a little sheepish now. He hadn't meant to cause any trouble, but the officer's words made him realize he had crossed a line. Sarah, who had been standing quietly nearby, gave Jack a concerned look as though she, too, was feeling the awkwardness of the situation. Before Jack could say anything else, the officer stepped back, giving him a look that said the matter was settled. Jack stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do next. The crowd, which had been laughing moments earlier, began to fall silent, sensing that something had changed. And then, as if to make the situation even more awkward, something unexpected happened. Jack, still feeling embarrassed, turned away from the officer and tried to walk back toward Sarah. But in his haste, he didn't notice a large, uneven patch of pavement ahead of him. His foot caught on the edge of the curb, and before he could react, he stumbled forward. For a split second, he tried to regain his balance, but it was too late. With a loud, unexpected thud, Jack fell flat on his face, landing hard on the ground. The crowd gasped in surprise. Jack's arms flailed for a moment as he struggled to push himself up, but his knees buckled beneath him, causing him to tumble back down. Sarah rushed over to him, her face a mix of concern and disbelief. "Are you okay?" she asked, helping him to sit up. Jack, still a little dazed from the fall, could only laugh weakly. His cheeks burned with embarrassment as the crowd around them burst into laughter. It wasn't the kind of reaction he had hoped for. But for some reason, the laughter felt different this time, more like a gentle reminder of how quickly things could change. One moment he had been playing the prankster, the center of attention. The next moment he was the one everyone was laughing at. As Jack stood up, brushing himself off, he couldn't help but feel the sting of instant karma. He had been trying so hard to get a royal guard to break character, to make them show some emotion. But in the end, it was Jack who had ended up looking foolish. It was as if the universe had decided to give him a little lesson in humility, showing him that what goes around truly comes around. Jack could only shake his head and laugh at himself. As the officer gave him a small, knowing nod before walking away, he realized that maybe he had learned something important after all. The guard might have kept his composure, but in the end it was Jack who had broken character, and it had cost him. The crowd had begun to disperse as the commotion around the royal guard slowly died down. Jack, still feeling the sting of embarrassment from his fall, stood up and brushed the dirt off his clothes. His cheeks burned with humiliation, but he couldn't help but laugh at himself. There was no denying it. He had gotten exactly what he deserved. After all, he had been trying so hard to get the Royal Guard to break character, and now it seemed like the universe had given him a little taste of his own medicine. Sarah, who had been watching from the side, couldn't help but shake her head in disbelief. She had seen Jack get into trouble before, but this was different. This time it wasn't just a harmless joke or prank, it was a moment of true embarrassment. She had been trying to warn him all along, but Jack had insisted on continuing his antics. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, her voice filled with concern as she helped Jack to his feet. She could see the awkwardness in his expression, and she felt a twinge of sympathy for him. "Maybe it's time to call it a day, Jack. I mean, you've already made quite a scene." Jack laughed weakly, his face still flushed from the fall. "Yeah, I guess I really did make a fool of myself, didn't I?" He dusted off his knees and glanced around at the small crowd of tourists who had been watching the whole ordeal. A few of them were still laughing quietly, and Jack couldn't blame them. After all, it had been pretty funny, just not in the way he had planned. Sarah gave him a soft smile. "You're not the first tourist to get a little carried away with trying to make the guards smile, but maybe next time you should think twice before messing with them." Jack nodded, realizing that Sarah was right. The whole thing had been a little over the top, and while he had thought it would be harmless fun, it had turned into something completely different. He felt bad about disrespecting the guards, even if he hadn't meant any harm. They were doing their jobs, and he had acted like it was all just a game. The truth was, he hadn't really understood the level of professionalism and respect the Royal Guards deserved until now. As Jack and Sarah began to walk away from the palace gates, Jack couldn't help but look back over his shoulder at the Royal Guard, who had remained completely unmoved throughout the entire exchange. The guard stood tall, his posture as perfect as ever, his eyes still fixed on some distant point. Jack had to admit, there was something impressive about the way the guard carried himself. Despite all the distractions, all the laughter, and all the attention, the guard had never once broken his composure. In a strange way, the guard had won that little battle without even trying. As they walked down the street, Jack's mind began to replay the events of the day. He couldn't stop thinking about how the guard had never flinched, never smiled, and never showed any sign of weakness. It made Jack realize something important. The guard wasn't just doing a job. He was performing a role that required incredible strength and discipline. It wasn't easy to stand in one spot for hours, to ignore the teasing and jokes of hundreds of tourists, and to stay completely still while the world moved around you. It took a level of focus and dedication that Jack had never really considered before. But then, Jack thought about something else, the way he had fallen. It wasn't just the physical stumble. It was the way he had been so confident moments before, thinking that he could make the guard break character. He had been so sure of himself, so convinced that he could get a reaction. But when it came time for him to act, he had tripped, literally and figuratively. The fall wasn't just a result of bad luck or clumsiness. It was a reminder that sometimes life has a funny way of teaching you lessons. Jack had been so focused on mocking the guard, trying to make him do something unexpected, that he had lost sight of what really mattered. He had ignored the guard's quiet strength and focus, and in doing so, he had made himself look foolish. The more Jack thought about it, the more he realized how much he had learned in just a few short hours. Maybe it wasn't about getting the guard to smile or laugh. Maybe it was about recognizing the kind of discipline and dedication it took to do the job they did. Maybe it was about understanding that not everything needed a reaction. Not every moment needed to be filled with noise and excitement. The guard's silence had been a statement in itself. But as they continued walking, Jack's thoughts were interrupted by a familiar sound, the laughter of the tourists around them. Some were still talking about the incident at the palace, retelling the story of the brave prankster who had tried to make the Royal Guard break. Jack overheard a group of people laughing and joking about the situation. Some of them had even captured the moment on their phones. A few of them were still chuckling about how Jack had fallen. Despite his embarrassment, Jack couldn't help but laugh along with them. There was no use in feeling sorry for himself. It was a funny story after all, and it had certainly made the day more memorable for everyone involved. The laughter wasn't mocking. It was light-hearted and playful, a reminder that sometimes the best thing you can do is laugh at yourself. But even as Jack smiled and shrugged it off, he knew that something had shifted in him. He had experienced a small moment of instant karma, and it had made him think. Maybe it wasn't just about getting laughs or having fun at someone else's expense. Maybe it was about showing respect for the things that truly deserved it. Maybe the guards weren't just there for the tourists to mess with. They were a part of something much bigger. They represented a long tradition, a symbol of the monarchy, and a reflection of the discipline that was a core value of British society. As they walked away from the palace, Jack felt a sense of quiet reflection settle over him. He hadn't expected to learn anything that day, certainly not from a royal guard. But life had a way of surprising him. Maybe the guard hadn't broken character, but in a way Jack had. He had broken through his own ideas of what was funny, what was worth mocking, and what deserved his respect. The guard had won the battle in the end, not by reacting, but by staying silent. And Jack had learned more from that silence than he ever could have learned from a smile or a laugh. The rest of the day passed without incident. And as Jack and Sarah explored more of London, Jack found himself looking at things a little differently. Every time he passed a guard, he felt a new sense of respect, a new understanding of their purpose. He had been foolish to think they were just there for amusement. Instead, he saw them as something more, symbols of patience, discipline, and quiet strength. It wasn't about forcing a reaction out of them. It was about appreciating their presence and the role they played in the history and culture of the country. By the time the sun began to set, Jack was in a much more reflective mood. He had started the day trying to make the royal guards laugh, thinking it would be a fun way to pass the time. But what he hadn't expected was that the real lesson would come from the guard's silence and his own humbling fall. And as Jack looked around at the historic buildings, the bustling streets, and the royal guards still standing in their posts, he realized that the day had given him more than just a funny story. It had given him a new perspective on respect, discipline, and the small moments that can change you in ways you never imagined.